Hey, so I am with Timothy Gard, and Tim has a really interesting business in Owen Sound focused in on STEM, which stands for science, technology, education, and math. And he is the next guest in the Rural Entrepreneur podcast series. So welcome to the podcast, Tim.
Thank you so much, Chris. It's a pleasure to be here.
So I'm a big fan of STEM. You know, I've been a tech guy for a lot of my adult life. And I'm also a big educator, and I love it when, people are helping youth develop their
Mm,
skills and experiences around
yeah,
technology. So why don't you just tell us a little bit about your background, and we'll see where the conversation leads. And of course, we want to talk about STEMVOX and whatnot. But why don't you just start off and introduce yourself and talk a little bit about whatever you think is important for people to know in this conversation.
sure. Well, as you mentioned, my name is Timothy Gard. I am the CEO of STEMVOX, which, as you mentioned, is here in Owen Sound. It's Sydenham Campus, Sydenham Skills Innovation Center, I think is the
Yeah.
technical title for it. Yeah, I'm originally from Owen Sound, however, moved away to school to university in Toronto. And then after that, I started to teach. So I went into the teaching profession and worked in Toronto for 30 years. And that's really where I gained my interest in STEM. I think it was 2009 where I came across the acronym STEM, science, technology, engineering, mathematics. And I was in Washington. I was attending a conference there, and people were banning about this term STEM, STEM. And I said, well, what's STEM? I mean, so talking to a few individuals, they informed me what it was, and it's the new thing. And so I started to investigate, do some research, and said, yeah, this is the future. And like yourself, I've always been involved in technology. In fact, most of my career was in the integration of technology into pedagogy. And
Mm.
so at several schools, I was chair of math, science, and technology, and was involved in really making technology just something kids could use in a instead of just playing games, which of course is what they typically like to do, which is fine as well because there's lots of benefits to that, but just to really show them how they could use it to further their future, so to speak. But
Mhm.
then STEM came along, and I started to integrate that, and so it became about project-based learning, which is really coming across problems that we find in the real world and allowing kids to delve into those problems in science, technology, engineering, mathematics, and apply different skill sets to that. So, of course, critical thinking, problem solving, and using different tools. And so, when I retired, I moved back here to Owen Sound, where I'm originally from, and decided, hey, there's a need here for this. I didn't see a whole lot going on in that area. It's tough to do in a public school, having done it myself. Resources are scarce, and they're not cheap to come by and to
Mhm.
support over time. So there's that whole, yeah, we can get the resources, like for example 3D printers, but they end up
Mhm.
you know um, quickly being overused, so to speak, because of course it's a huge thing, and of course replacing them is not cheap. And the other side of it is, of course, having the background, the expertise to be able to integrate STEM into programs, which your regular teacher doesn't have that background. Typically in K-8, which is where I was, teachers have a humanities background, and so yeah, so that wasn't something that was really terribly common. And so in Toronto, I started the first independent STEM program in elementary schools, and it kind of took off from there. And a number of other schools started to do the same thing, and I was able to consult with them about that. I also work with a company called Mindshare Learning. I'm their chief learning officer, chief learning strategist. The term changes every once in a while.
Mhm.
So I help them with the integration of technology, working with companies who are interested in getting into the educational sector with their software, hardware. And I would often review that in classrooms and provide them with insights and backgrounds as to, it's going to work or it's not going to work. In fact, I'm currently hoping to work with a school here in Blue Water with an artificial intelligence program called Scribo, which is a writing program which will help kids learn to write using artificial intelligence. So, yeah, so that's kind of an overview of my background, and I've really enjoyed it. Of course, I started this program in Owen Sound. We've been sort of in existence for less than a year. I have a STEMVOX Academy, so I have students who can leave their school program and come for a day once a week. Grades 3s and 4s are on Tuesdays, 5s and 6s on Wednesdays, 7 and 8s on Thursdays. And so it's completely STEM from the beginning of the day to the end of the day. It's all hands-on learning with different devices that we have, everything from, as I mentioned, 3D printers to information of things, sensors, so lots of different things in robotics that kids can get involved in, but again, focus on, solving a problem. And as much as that's great and all the tools are great, our emphasis, or my emphasis, is really developing those critical thinking and problem solving skills that they will need moving forward. So, and we're just introducing actually an entrepreneurial part of it as well. So kids come up with ideas. Well, why don't you run with it and see what kind of a business idea you could come up with around that idea, so that there's that, again, a real world connection. And I think moving forward, this is what's going to happen. Students who, instead of going to work for a large company, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but they could start their own company around a niche area of the market that they have some expertise or background in. Yeah,
That's really cool, and I certainly want to dig deeper into the entrepreneurship thing because of what we're doing with Area 81, which is a rural entrepreneurship accelerator. I started with 3 other founding members, and um, we, before I came up here from Oakville about 4 or 5 years ago, I had started um, a technology community called Silicon Halton, and one of the things that spun out of it was a Tech Under 20 program, that was just spearheaded by a young lady who was in high school, whose father was a member of Silicon Halton, and she just came up to me one day and said, "Hey, I'd like to do a meetup and talk about all the cool things that us kids are doing in high school, in
yeah,
robotics and software development and other things." And that was probably the most rewarding. I mean, it was a really interesting venture that I started with 2 other co-founders, but the thing that I'll always remember and feel um, strongly about is just how these young kids were so self-motivated to learn about STEM, because technology, if you're writing programs, you've got to think of algorithms, you've got to think of math, you've got to think of critical thinking. Um, so, so you said you left. You left Owen Sound, as many people do, when they go to university, and but you came back. So, what was the motivating factor for you to come back and become a rural entrepreneur yourself?
Yeah, that's a good question. To be honest with you, I never envisioned myself coming back to Owen Sound. But with that being said, you can't really take the small town out of the boy. I love the rural area here. As a kid, I just love being able to go for long walks and not have to stare at concrete, and cars and so on and so forth. I mean, I love Toronto, but that being said, I didn't really see that moving forward, that I wanted to be there. And my wife is teaching. She's a French immersion teacher. And as I retired, I said, well, I can't sit around doing it. I'm not that kind of a person. So, this is my background. This is my skill set, so to speak. And so I thought, what, I'm going to start something up and see where it goes. And so that's really what's happened. We're also, we do summer camps, and I'm
Mhm.
hoping to do after school programs as well. So, and yeah, and it's funny you mentioned Area 81, because we're starting a whole unit in hydroponics next week, or this week actually. And so, which is kind of a cool thing. And STEM is such a vast field, right? There's just so many
Mhm.
different directions you can go. And I thought, man, let's. I've been introduced to this company in Cornwall called ZipGrow. They're very involved in pushing their stuff in education. I think is an awesome idea. And so we kind of jumped into that, and we're gonna learn about hydroponics and why that's so important. And of course, we're going to bring the STEM piece into it a little more, besides that whole life systems piece, by using sensors to measure temperature, humidity.
Mhm.
We have digital microscopes. We can examine the product, and check for disease, and so on and so forth. So
Mhm.
all of this is just very, very practical stuff that kids kind of think, hey, I didn't know you could do this. And of course, as you mentioned, they're self-motivated. Once they get excited about there's no holding them back. They run forward with it. And I've seen that in my career in Toronto. Many kids were, you know, really, really interested in STEM, and it stuck with them. About a year ago, I had a girl who I taught science come back to me. She's an astrophysicist now. And,
Mhm.
she's her specialty you know, um, is in black holes. So it's just incredible where these things go, right? So it's just like,
Mhm.
oh, tell me about black holes. And so, and other people, I have a friend who works for NASA who specializes in black holes as well. And so, just, and he would come in and he would zoom into our classroom, and kids would be ready with questions, and he was always blown away by just the kinds of questions they had about black holes, about space, and so on and so forth. So, you get them interested in something, and they'll take off with those ideas, and really, surprise you what they come up with. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting in my conversations with entrepreneurs, these things kind of just come out of the conversation, which is very motivating, but also you find these interconnections and potential ties um, with each other's networks. So where I'm going with
Hmm.
this is I know a guy who was like a rocket scientist developer that I worked with in Atlanta for many, many
Hmm.
moons, and
Hmm. Hmm.
now he has a channel on YouTube all about NASA. Right?
Yeah.
Right. So
Yeah.
I'm thinking, well, maybe I could, get John to do something cool with Tim and his program, and
Mm.
find ways to continue to leverage the types of relationships that I've had over the years to sort of bring really cool people together.
Yeah.
Um, um,
Yeah.
let's talk about you know you could have not done it. Like I know you said you couldn't not do anything,
Hmm.
and I think your passion is all about teaching STEM to kids.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, And I guess, you could have done it in many ways, but you chose to take an entrepreneurial route. In other words, let's make a business out of this, and versus, well, maybe I'll volunteer and help this local school board. I don't want to necessarily, get into too much detail about your motivations, in
Hmm.
terms of
Hmm.
why did you want to start it because you wanted to make a lot of money, or if you thought a
Hmm.
venture would make more sense versus, say, just volunteering my time, because that is a decision to make that an entrepreneur or potential entrepreneur will make. Is I have time, I have an idea, um, and I want to give back, but you know what? I think I want to start a business. So I'm just curious as to how those
Yeah. it-
ingredients kind of fed
that's
into
yeah.
the
That's
decision.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think as a teacher, I always was curious about, small business. And having worked with the organization I work with, which is, a small business, I had a lot of mentorship through the director of this organization. And And I was kind of became excited about it because, you know, it was his world, so to speak, right? He could run and do whatever he wanted with it. You didn't have overlords looking over your shoulder necessarily to, you know, so you had some freedom. And the other part of it was to really actually run a business, a STEM business, where you're going to use the current materials. It's a money thing, right? And so,
Yeah.
you know, driving forward with, like, you know, getting the different devices, the robotics, the drones, the electronic microscopes, so on and so forth. You know, it
Mhm.
takes money, and, you know, I didn't want to dip into my pocket to do that.
Yeah.
So you know, this is kind of the route that made sense. And so, you know, those two reasons were why I decided the small business route. I was curious and wanted to experience it. And with that being said, I learned a lot too. Like, small business owners work hard. You have to work hard to make it go. And so I've gained this newfound appreciation for people who start small businesses, and realizing, wow, you know, there's a lot of different moving parts. And you know, I think it's great because it's really, really rewarding when you work hard. And but you know, it's the backbone of our country in many ways, right? Small businesses and
Yeah.
people running with their ideas. And the other side of it too is that I wanted to bring something to this community that was different. You know, it's not necessarily, you know, something that you would see. I mean, I've a lot of the kids that attend my programs, interestingly enough, are kids who've moved up here from the city,
Huh.
and, you know, parents were looking for, you know, alternative programs like this one to feed, you know, their kids' interests. There's a huge interest in STEM, of course, in Saugeen Shores area because of Bruce Nuclear, and a lot of
Mhm.
those people working in that, you know, that facility have backgrounds in technology and engineering sciences, and so of course they want to expose their kids to the same thing.
Mhm.
So there was a need, and so, you know, I'm slowly kind of working that way. Started in Owen Sound because I live in Owen Sound,
Mhm.
but I hope to expand to Saugeen Shores and offer the same sorts of things there. Although I do have a number of kids coming from that area to the school
Mhm. Mhm.
once a week, and so, yeah, so that's basically my motivation and the reason why I wanted to do the small business route, and I'm glad I did. I'm really enjoying it. Yeah.
Oh, good, good. Is there anything about the area um, that makes it unique from, say, if you had decided to start it in the city? So, because there are certain opportunities and challenges associated to setting up a
Mhm.
business in a rural setting. Is there anything that jumps out at you, you know, in terms of some of the challenges, maybe opportunities that you saw being in a rural area and being a rural entrepreneur, for lack of a better word?
Yeah, another good question. I think in the city, STEM is really more prevalent, at least the understanding and the need and so on and so forth. So I'm finding, you know, here that I speak as STEM as like everybody knows what the acronym means. Well, not necessarily. And so I have to be careful about that. I'll speak, oh, I run a STEM business. What's that? You know, and so I would say in the city you're less likely to run into that, whereas
Mhm.
here, you know, it's a little more prevalent. The other side of it is that there's a huge, of course, agrarian focus, right? So the whole idea of, you know, what can we do to, you know, for agriculture. So there's that whole focus on, you know, our environment, which I think is extremely important. You live here, you see how beautiful it is. Well, it's going to stay beautiful as long as we look after it, right? And so there's
Mhm.
that piece that
Mhm.
is really interesting. I've run into some really interesting people. You know, an individual who has a PhD in hydrology, for example, who lives, you know, outside of Owen Sound.
Mhm.
You know, an individual in Wyerton who, through this person, said, "Hey, you know, did you know there's a, you know, former professor of electrical engineering at Cornell who lives in Wyerton?" I said, "What? That's crazy!" And then he's doing his own thing there, and it's just all these people popping out of the woodwork, and you know, so that's kind of cool. But yeah, so there's that, you know, there's that kind of STEM literacy, or, you know, that's lacking a bit,
Mhm.
perhaps. And then, of course, as I said, the big focus is environmental concerns and agriculture and so on and so forth, which is one of the reasons why I kind of went the hydroponics route, to bring kids into that and say, yeah, this is something you can do and you can learn. It's easier than maybe going out and having a plot of land and doing the kind of work that requires to investigate it from that sort of standpoint. So yeah.
The microscope comment you made, where you have, and I guess this is really important, is the science behind agriculture. So, for example, if you look at soil and whether it's healthy or not, which is an
Mm-hmm.
ongoing debate in
Mm-hmm.
the agriculture sector, is, you know, am I farming in such a way that the soil continues to become more healthy? Am I establishing a foundation where I don't need as much chemicals in order to produce high yield crops? All these things are coming up. And for about 2.5 years, I went down the rabbit hole, let's call it, of a potential carbon farming startup called AgGen.
Mm.
And the idea behind it was, hey, there's this thing called carbon credits and nature-based solutions, that are aimed to improve the overall ecology of the area. But what was interesting at that point in time, and a farmer tipped this off to me, this isn't something that I just made up for, saw something on the internet or on social media and said, hey, maybe I should start a carbon farming startup. No, he was very interested because he's very much focused on sustainable farming and implementing best practices and minimizing the amount of chemicals that he puts on his land for his crops.
Mm-hmm.
And he was frustrated because he really cares about the quality of the soil, but he didn't see as many other farmers, who were doing the same things he was doing to improve the quality of the soil. So where I'm going with this is, it's an area that is really interesting in terms of just using my microscopy and thinking about STEM when it
Mm-hmm.
comes to agriculture in general, but not just about technology, about the science, about, using microscopy as an example to really assess the quality of the soil and what's in it and the quality of the leaves and if the leaves are stressed. So I actually took a soil management course just trying to understand it, and I love the idea that you've got kids that are learning how to use this type of technology locally, because I see a potential link to this farmer, and him wanting
Mm.
to, do some things around the science of soil.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and, agriculture and ecology are really kind of coming together in a lot
Yeah.
of ways. And, um, but, I don't know, maybe you've seen this, and I would love to see how farmers and non-farmers who are all entrepreneurs figure out ways to get together to help improve the profitability of the farm without sort of offending farmers, because they're a very proud group of people. They work very,
Mm-hmm.
very hard, but there
Mm-hmm.
are realities of farming today, which is it's not as profitable as it could be or should be. And how does a bunch of rural entrepreneurs get together to figure out ways to improve the sector? And
Mm-hmm.
it's a
Mm-hmm.
big problem, but it's something that I'm
Mm-hmm.
willing to tackle, with other willing
Mm.
people. But
Mm.
what's your experience been? Do you have any, kids who live on farms that are taking STEM courses, or?
I do. I do. I have a number of kids who live on farms and have responsibilities in the farm, and and I'm thinking of one individual in particular. His parents are huge on this whole ecology, growing food that, to your point, is sustainable and healthy. and how can we do that in a way that and educating students, right? I mean, because we take these things for granted, right? I go to the grocery store and I get my food or whatever, but they don't really think about the process involved in producing that food and ensuring that it's healthy and so on and so forth. And it's a complex process, and like anything in STEM, I mean, it's the awareness thing. It's like, okay, well, did you know that? And let's investigate it. And do you see any, potential problems with that?
Mm.
And so, and kids, as long as you form it in the right way and provide the introduction and provide them with the right kind of information, they come up with great questions, and many questions you can't really answer. Hence the whole project-based learning and inquiry, right? So an
Mm.
inquiry is coming up with a question where you don't have an answer for it, but you're investigating and you're finding out more and more about that particular problem. And of course, here in the rural area where there's obviously lots of farming is happening, that's an extremely important connection. With that being said, and I just want to mention this, one of the things I want to do moving forward is to connect with experts in outside of STEMVOX and have them come in and be a resource. Because I know certain things, but of course I don't know everything, and there's experts out there that know a whole heck of a lot more. So to be able to have them either Zoom in or coming in the classroom to present information to the students so that they can get their head around what it's all about. I was reading an article yesterday, in fact, that stated that kids start to develop an interest in what they want to do quite early, but they need to be given exposure to the different things that are going on and the different fields that they could get involved in. And it's quite fascinating, the article that this individual had written about, that connection between they develop these interests quite young, and they latch onto something and they stick with it. And I think that's cool. But if you aren't introduced to these different areas, then you don't know, like, what's hydrology,
Mm.
and so um, that's one of the other things I want to do, and hoping to expose kids to the different things going on that make our economy function, that make this area function in particular, and how can we improve it? Because I think ultimately, you know, anything in the kind of entrepreneurial area that I'm involved in, it's about improvement, right? It's about how can we have an impact on the students and the kids who live here, and instead of maybe going away to school and never coming back, going to school and coming back and saying, hey, I want to make a difference here, and this is how I want to make a difference.
Yeah, and, you know, I mean, it's like if you take energy, so and you take agriculture and you look at them separately as sectors, that's one way to look at it. But if you look at them together and how they can coexist and how they should, how they could, whatever you want to, however you want to say it, I think of things like, okay, so there's probably a bunch of clear-cutted land um, that allows for the transmission lines to go down to Toronto.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
those tend to be free of trees, free of everything, so that the lines,
Mm-hmm.
there's no risk to the lines going down. But how if you brought together the right people who were interested in it, and if it cut across farmers' lands and they're trying to figure out what to do with that unused land, there are things like rewilding projects, right? Where you can, create a new migration path for a specific type of species or introduce new species to it. And that
Mm-hmm.
doesn't happen in one person's mind. It's more of a collection of people working on a bunch of ideas and, thinking more broadly about, how can we introduce ecology into the conversation, but actually do projects. And that's what I really liked about, what you talk about is,
Mm-hmm.
project-based things, you know, um, it doesn't always have to be about problems. It could be about just doing something for fun. But
Mm-hmm.
if it's fun and it solves a problem, that's even better, right? So um, Yeah, I really love the idea of project-based problem solving approach. Can you give me some examples of projects, maybe two or three projects at some of your workshops and your after school, or you're not doing after school programs yet, right?
No, no. Well, we're open to start them at any time.
Okay.
Yeah, and yeah, so that could definitely, and it's a little more challenging to do the projects after school just simply because of the time piece.
Time.
And
Yeah.
so when students come to STEMVOX Academy, which is what I call it, they have that time, they have that day, and then they can continue to work on that project for several months, or maybe even through the whole course of the year, depending on how interesting it is to them, and so on and so forth. So yeah, I mean, we just
So,
finished.
okay. Go ahead.
Yeah,
I'd like you to focus on the
yeah,
academy. So please.
yeah. So yeah, we recently we were studying structures and mechanisms. And so, the students were building buildings, and they were given a problem where they had to develop this building in an area that was, there was a lot of seismic activity, so
Mm,
possibility of earthquakes. And so they had to design, these buildings in such a way where they could withstand, whatever level of earthquake or seismic activity would happen. And so they did their research and looked at, of course, different parts of the world where that happened. And so they built their projects. They actually built an earthquake simulator
mm,
using some Vex IQ brains that moved this, the simulator at different levels. And then they used a data bot, which is a sensor that they could place on the building and collect data in terms of X, Y, and Z axes, and then import that data or export that data and import it into Google Sheets and then analyze it. And
mm,
one individual had decided he was going to build a oil rig platform that existed in a part of the world where there was some seismic activity under the water. And so what he decided to do was to test it without his enhancements and see what happened, of course, with the data bot, collect the data. Then he decided, well, why don't I put some heavy weights in the middle of it that, in the center of this um, um, oil rig and see if that made a difference. And he compared the data, and sure enough, there it was. He saw it plain as day, and it was like a eureka moment. Hey, look, it's dampened the effect of the seismic activity actually quite an extreme way. And so there's things of that nature. So it's very real world in that they're doing what engineers are doing, of course, at a much more complex level, but still they're understanding, the process. And with that being said, we talk about the engineering design process, and we talk about the scientific method, and we talk about scientific research. What does that look like? And so kids are being introduced to those things quite early. So when they move forward, it's second nature to them. Okay, I know how to approach this problem. I need to do my research. I need to have a hypothesis. I need to test that hypothesis, develop the results from that, and then iterate as necessary. And
mm.
so yeah, and so that's we've done things like that. We've used other sensors for robots, for example, and many miniature robots are becoming bigger and bigger, especially in warehouses. And so they've had robots that use sensors to detect movement, objects, and then they have to code those robots in such a way where they can maneuver through a schema and do what they need to do, like pick up an object and return to point A where it started. And
Mm.
so this is real world stuff. I mean, it's happening in Google and Amazon's warehouses where they have barcodes on the floor and the robots run over them and read the barcode. They know what section of the warehouse they're in and whether they belong there or not. And then of course they can read barcodes and so on and so forth. So all of that we've done. And again, students are saying, "Hey, now I get it. Now I understand. But what about this? And what about that?" And so, well, why don't you analyze that and see what comes of it? So, yeah, fascinating stuff. And the kids when they're involved in, and students when they're involved in these real world problems, they realize that solving complex problems is not easy. It's a hard thing. When I first started STEMVOX, I had open houses where I invited parents to come in, and I went through a slideshow, and on one of the slides I used a short video from a Nobel Prize winning physicist who made that point that kids need to understand that A, don't give up.
Mm.
B, it's a lot of hard work, but at the end of the road, once you put in the hard work and you're committed to solving a problem, it's amazing what happens. And I try to explain to the students that Nobel Prize winners aren't typically young people. They're much further down in their career, and they've looked at this particular area for years and years and years. Case in point, Jeffrey Hinton, who just recently won a Nobel Prize, in physics for his work in AI.
Yeah.
And he's not a young man, right? I mean, he's done this his whole life, developing that whole large language model stuff. And so we're kids are doing that, and they're doing things that are, as I said, being done in the real world, maybe at a smaller scale, but they're understanding the connection. And so yeah, that's what we're doing. And moving forward in hydroponics, as I said, we will be using sensors to place in our hydroponic pieces to read humidity, temperature. We even have the ability to measure volatile organic compounds. And so if something's going amiss, something's wrong. Well, it was, maybe there's some form of gas that's having an impact on the growth of the plants, and so on and so forth. And we can even censor the water as well.
Hmm.
So yeah.
Um, I'd like to dig into AI a little bit, and then
Hmm.
we'll talk about some advice you can give aspiring entrepreneurs who are thinking about starting, and we'll close off the interview with that. But let's talk a little bit of AI, because it's one of these things that, depending on who you talk to, it's either something that's totally terrifying, or the next internet. Um,
Mm-hmm.
it's everywhere you read, everywhere you go on YouTube, there's tons of money to be made in AI, all that sort of stuff. And I myself, we've been using AI for the last, well, how long's ChatGPT been out? 3 years now,
Hmm.
roughly. So we've been using it for various reasons. But I'm interested in your introducing AI to young kids, and the reason for that, and some examples of how you're integrated into your programming.
Yeah, it's a good question. Well, first of all, I think there's an ethics component to it, right? And we know
Yeah,
that in education. I mean, kids
yeah,
are, asking ChatGPT or whatever language model they're using to write them an essay on blah
yeah,
blah blah, and
yeah,
and it does a darn good job, right?
yeah.
So, but we want to leverage the use of AI in such a way where, the power of it can help to, improve students' thinking and so on and so forth. I mean, I've seen AI, probably involved in, for the last decade. So I've
Mhm.
used,
It's not
um,
new. It's been
no, it's
around
not.
for many,
No, it's
many years.
not. It
Yeah.
it it's not new, and you're right. It's just kind of obviously reached that tipping point where it's way more powerful and it's more available. But so we were using software programs in mathematics, for example, that students would go in and the software would determine what they understood and what they didn't, and so they wouldn't be able to move forward beyond a base understanding, like say in numbers, unless they understood the foundations of something. So they couldn't move on to, for example, into fractions or algebra without understanding, the foundation of number sense. And so,
Mm.
and that was all done in the software in the background, and that's a form of artificial intelligence. It's kind of collecting the data based on their inputs, and then deciding, well, this individual doesn't understand this, and so we're going to give them a different question just to sort of challenge in that. So what specifically don't they understand, in other words? And so that software has been around for a while. In terms of approaching AI, I'm using or will be using Google DeepMind stuff, and also Raspberry Pi Foundation have developed some really good material for an introduction to artificial intelligence. And you know, what is it, of course, and why can we use it, and how can we use it, and leverage the use of it to do things that would take us infinitely longer to do. You know, I don't know if you watched the CES stuff in Las Vegas, but you know, NVIDIA has developed a computer, $3,000 computer that has, I don't know how many petaflops it'll do. It's an unbelievable. And you know, you start using that with AI, and you know, things that would take you, calculations that would take you years, you can do in a day. And so that changes things, right? So the data that you're analyzing is really more upfront. It's there, it's current, and you can run with it and do different things with it, as opposed to, I'm going to crunch the data using an older method when AI can do it for you.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting because one of the things that Jeffrey Hinton said that I read in an article, I think he did, it was an interview with Globe and Mail. He said, people think that AI isn't self-aware. And he said it is. Now that was that was a pretty astounding statement to make. And what do you mean by self-aware, right? We don't mean by sentient. I mean, is that possible? But, so it's, and then over time, people were saying, well, it's not giving me the same sorts of responses that it used to. It's kind of lazy, So yeah, it's an incredible, interesting area. As I mentioned, I'm hoping to get a school here in Blue Water involved in a pilot using AI to help kids learn to write. So instead of throwing a question in ChatGPT and getting it to write for me, let's leverage it to show you how to write, and to write, more powerfully and more cogently. And so, if we leverage it that way and we teach kids that, hey, listen, don't cheat yourself, because, if you get something to write it for, you're not going to learn how to write. And then, of course, there are ways around that. It's like querying them about what they wrote, and they can't give a proper response, then it's kind of, and so, yeah, we don't want to make people lazy, right? We want to use it as an extension to what we already know, and it's a powerful tool.
Yeah, so here's my concern about AI. First of all, the world is now being more so being run by algorithms and automations, where the technology is superseding, human activity, which I think is very, very problematic. So things like critical thinking, problem solving, empathy, interactions, things like that, need to supersede algorithms all the time. And you're seeing that on social media in terms of algorithms basically being the default. When I actually care more about something you post on Facebook, if you do, than the 50 people that have posted stuff, or organizations that have posted stuff that the algorithm thinks that I should see in order to increase my time on it and appeal to advertisers. So if you apply that to the algorithms that are running an LLM, and you start letting it make decisions for you and automating things without there being any human interaction or human management and oversight, we got a problem. And I honestly, I think it's bizarre that somebody would think that AI will actually be more intelligent than humans, because my pushback on that is, how much do we know about the brain? How much do we actually know about the brain? It- so, but I love it. I love what AI can, the potential of AI, but there's the concentration of power. There's who are running the data centers, the Microsofts of the world, and this. So that's why I love the idea of independent entrepreneurs figuring out ways to leverage AI and make businesses out of it, but not at the expense of more important things like Anyway,
the
I could go on and on.
humanity,
Oh, for sure.
right?
Yeah,
Well,
yeah,
and that's that whole ethics piece, right? And you wonder at what point does it continue to evolve without sort of government stepping in and saying, okay, well, we need to put a governor on this, right? We need to
yeah,
manage it a little. But the problem with that, of course, is you may have Western society that decides that, and then you have your rogue states that have access to it that are just going to
yeah,
let it run. And
yeah,
like weapon systems being managed by, and what do you determine? What's that? Prime. That's what's that prime motive for allowing it to make decisions, right? And so
mm,
that's an interesting, philosophers are stuck in their rooms thinking and talking about that, because it's quite an interesting topic. It really is. But to your point, yeah, what makes us human and what separates us from machines and so on and so forth, and how does that happen, and how do we not allow it to take over humanity and depossess us of who we really are, right? Yeah.
yeah, yeah. It's an interesting opportunity, for sure. There's no two ways about it. And we need lots and lots of people thinking about ways that AI can make things better for us and make things better
Mm,
for other people who are in need. Solve really, really tough problems. Um, like for example, if ChatGPT decided, hey, it's costing us too much per token to be able to handle all of these queries, because that's really all they really are is queries and questions and
mhm,
prompts. And they say, okay, well, what we'll do is we'll throttle it back so that instead of, doing 4,000 characters, we'll only do 20,000 or 1,000 characters, and then ask if you'd like the rest printed or the rest. And I'm seeing this as I use ChatGPT, and
mhm,
you give the
mhm.
instructions as, complete this, and then it'll only do three or four, and they'll say, would you like me to continue? And I think part of me, the conspiracy dude in me, starts thinking, well, somebody's probably looking at the P&L and L and they're saying, hey, we're it's costing us too much for, for all these tokens. And, who knows,
Yeah. Well,
what the motivations are, right? In terms of
well, the
changing the
extreme
way it
amount of
works.
well, the extreme amount of power that's required
Yeah.
to run, these GPUs, and that's one of the problems with it, of course, is that I believe that the major players in the software industry are developing their own, nuclear power plants,
Hmm.
because they realize in order to make these things run, they're going to have to have access to power and unlimited amounts of power. And so, yeah, and that's problematic, of course, because there's depending on what kind of, you know, method or model they're using in nuclear power generation, it involves water, involves cooling, and involves again, going back to ecology, right? What are we going to do to our planet just so that we can, ask a bunch of questions that require a lot of power generation? So, yeah, these are the ethical questions we need to really sit down and talk about. Yeah.
Yeah. So heavy stuff. Let's lighten it a bit. Um, I always ask as the last question, if there was a younger you, or if there was a young person thinking about their paths in terms of, hey, I could do the entrepreneurial route or I could do the non-entrepreneurial route, what would you recommend they think about in terms of helping make that decision about becoming an entrepreneur?
Well, I think you have to really start with being, honest with yourself, and you have to be a self-starter. It's not going to come to you, so you have to realize that. I mean, this is nothing new. I mean, you have to be prepared to work hard. There's no like 8 to 5 kind of thing.
Mm.
Sometimes it's earlier in the morning or late at night, and so and I think doing your research, right? Really understanding, what it is you're offering to the community, and making sure that it's unique enough that you're going to make it float, right?
Mhm.
So one of the things that I did was, and I know this just because of being in Toronto. Yeah, there are organizations that are offering STEM. The difference was that they weren't really run by teachers. So my background is really more the pedagogy and so that was kind of unique. So I think you need
Mhm.
to look for something unique, and you have to really, focus on providing the best of the best, and that takes time and it takes effort. I think also reaching out and being part of a community, which is what you're doing. I think that's important because we learn so much from each other.
Mhm.
Um, and really, supporting one another and building these unique businesses, whatever that may be. And so, yeah, I think I was never earlier on a risk taker. It does involve some risk.
Mhm.
And so, and that's the other thing that I want to do. I thought, I'm going to take a bit of a risk here and do something I've never done before.
Mhm.
And again, as I said earlier, it's been rewarding. I've enjoyed it. Lots still to learn, but
Mhm.
I keep coming across people like yourself who have lots of background in these areas, and it's good to chat and say, hey, what do you think about this? And
Mhm.
you get some good feedback and some good wisdom. So yeah, that's what I would say.
Well, Tim, thanks very much. I appreciate your time, and looking forward to seeing STEMVOX continue to grow, and our relationship to continue to grow as well.
Yeah,
Appreciate it.
thank you so much, Chris. I appreciate having the opportunity to talk with you, and it's been fun.
All the best.
All right, take care.